Distinguished guests, esteemed panelists, colleagues, and friends, it's my great honor to welcome you all to the Urban Thinker Campus on Land-Based Finance here at the Torquato di Tella University in Buenos Aires. On behalf of the Center for Housing and Urban Policies at Torquato di Tella University, it's my great honor to welcome you all to this Urban Thinker Campus on Land-Based Finance here at Torquato di Tella University in Buenos Aires. And on behalf of the Center for Housing and Urban Policies at Torquato di Tella University and our co-organizers are all the World Urban Campaign partners, Smartly Social Enterprise in the Sustainable Development Goals, Global Urban Development, International Union of Architects, Institute of Management in Latin America at San Gallen University. I extend a very warm welcome and express our gratitude for your participation in this very important global dialogue. Your insights and experiences from diverse contexts will enrich our understanding of how land-based financing can contribute to driving sustainable urban development worldwide. This Urban Thinker Campus directly aligns with the principles of the new urban agenda and its vision for inclusive, equitable, resilient, and sustainable cities. Land, one of the most valuable assets, holds immense potential for generating revenue streams that can meet the tremendous needs for infrastructure, housing, and climate resilient urbanization. However, realizing this potential requires overcoming complex governance challenges, building technical capacities, and fostering an enabling policy environment. It demands innovation in land policy, administration, and financing models. So, over the next few hours, our distinguished panels of global experts will share perspective on the latest land-based finance innovations being pioneering worldwide. I'm extremely glad that we have experts and participants from all over the world. Some of them are waking up in the middle of the night to participate from Hong Kong. In our exchange of ideas, we will highlight successful case studies, analyze emerging best practices, and discuss scalable strategies for maintaining these approaches into urban policymaking. So I hope this Urban Thinker Campus provides a rich platform for exchanging knowledge, ideas, and solutions. So I now have the honor of giving the floor to the organizers from World Urban Campaign. First, we will receive a video from Sri Husnaini Sofjan, co-chair of the World Urban Campaign at the UN Habitat Secretariat, who was not able to be connected today. Later, I will give the floor to Analia Pastran, co-chair of the World Urban Campaign, UN Habitat, and founder of Smartly Social Enterprise on the Sustainable Development Goals. And later, to Dario Judzik from our university, from Torquato di Tella University. Dario is the executive head of the School of Governments at the university. So let's start with the video of Sri Husnaini Sofjan.
A very good morning from Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia. I'm delightful to join you through this video message at this Urban Thinkers Campus on the topic of land-based finance. My name is Sri Husnaini Sofjan. I'm one of the two co-chairs of the World Urban Campaign of the United Nations Human Settlements Program, in short, UN Habitat. I'm sure all of you know the other World Urban Campaign co-chair, Analia Pastran, the founder of Smartly Social Enterprise on SDG. First, I would like to congratulate the organizer of the Urban Thinkers Campaign today, which is a joint effort by the work professional partners together with the research and academic partners, namely Smartly Social Enterprise together with Tella University, Global Urban Development, University of St. Gallen, and the International Union of Architects. These two partner constituencies made up at least 30% of the over 320 partners of the World Urban Campaign around the world. The World Urban Campaign, in short, WUC or WUC, is an advocacy and partnership platform to raise awareness about positive urban change in order to achieve green, productive, safe, healthy, inclusive, and well-planned cities. Its goal is to place the new urban agenda at the highest level in development policies. It is coordinated by UN Habitat and driven by a large number of committed partners from around the world. The campaign vision is together shaping the future cities, leaving no one behind. The Urban Thinkers Campus is an initiative that serves as an open platform for critical discussion among its members, made up of 14 partner constituent groups who view urbanization as an opportunity for positive transformation. It aims to foster collaboration among partners for the implementation of the Sustainable Development Goals by 2030 and the New Urban Agenda by 2036, a space for reflection and collective action around critical urban issues. The Urban Thinkers Campus comprises of urban labs, plenary session, action days, urban cinema, as well as urban journalism academy events that promotes inclusive participation. The success of each UTC is attributed to the dynamic engagement and initiative of all book partners, leading at this point to over 30,000 participants in at least 280 UTC sessions since it started in 2014. The UTC, the Urban Thinkers Campus, is a brand name of the World Urban Campaign. Today, all of you will be discussing land-based finance and its link to the contemporary urban challenges in the face of climate change. I'm no expert on this topic. The basic knowledge I know of this topic is from the Global Land Tool Network. According to the Global Land Tool Network, land-based finance is premised on the fact urban land is a key factor of production, an asset, and an important source of financing for urban development, including infrastructure, social housing, and basic services. As you deliberate on this topic, I want you to consider how land-based finance is linked to the 10 action areas of the city we need now, a shared vision and framework developed by the World Urban Campaign. And these key areas are for cities and communities to become truly regenerative, heritage-rich, resilient, and sustainable. These 10 action areas are: first, health and well-being; second, peace and security; third, climate adaptation and resilience; fourth, inclusion and gender equality; fifth, economic opportunities for all; sixth, culture and identity; seven, local governance; eight, urban planning and design; ninth, housing, services and mobility; 10, learning and innovation. Central to your work is to ensure gender equality and women's empowerment as keys to your strategies and success. I wish you a rich discussion, and I look forward to learning of the recommendation and solution coming out of this Urban Thinkers Campus. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you for that, and I welcome Analia.
Hi, all. Greetings to everyone. Thank you so much, Cynthia, for opening this session. I'm delighted to, on behalf of the World Urban Campaign, opening this discussion and this specific UTC. And I would like to share briefly what are we doing from the World Urban Campaign. As Sri mentioned, my colleague, We have different work partners worldwide, and we are very grateful of having this local host, the University de Tella in Buenos Aires, and connecting this specific topic. From the Urban Campaign, we have different programs, such as this one, The City We Need Now, with more than 10 principles for the city that we would like to live. And since we are in a short time, I'm going to encourage all of you to visit our website in unhabitat.org/World Urban Campaign. So there you have the manifesto of these specific principles and some concrete best practices that we would like to encourage all of you to get that knowledge. And this year, we choose this campaign, Housing Matters, and as you know, this topic is very well related with this UTC. So we are encouraging all of the work partners and the cities to work together to get affordable housing, since by 2030 we estimate from UN Habitat that at least 3 billion people, 40% of the world's population, will need access to adequate housing. And this is a concrete global emergency that we need to work together. And of course, it's very well connected with the climate change crisis. So in that sense, we are working as well with different UTCs on sustainability in sustainability in the built environment. And in all the UTCs, we are trying to encourage all the cities and the local partners in connecting housing matters with the different topics like the climate change crisis, the housing emergency, the slums, also how to have sustainable entrepreneurs in their communities, among others. In this specific UTC, we are going to connect the instruments of planning, housing, finance, and policies and legislation. So I'm glad that we are having different experts worldwide that are going to share their experience in this event. And well, last week, as in the steering committee of the Urban Campaign, we were shocked to realize that the Summit of the Future in September is not putting in the draft of the Pact of the Future this topic, urbanization and affordable housing. For that reason, we are preparing a global declaration that I would like to encourage all of you to be part of this, trying to raise awareness of the relevance of having this topic in the Summit of the Future that the Secretary General of the United Nations is going to have in September. And well, I would like to also invite you all to join us in the World Urban Forum in November in Egypt, where we are going to have also a specific UTC. So thank you so much. I'm delighted to share this floor with Dario, and happy to see you all during this day. Thank you.
Welcome, Dario, and thank you to join us.
Thank you so much. Good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here with you today. My name is Dario Judzik. I am the Executive Dean of the School of Government in Universidad Torquato di Tella, the Di Tella University. It's my very pleasure to give you a warm welcome to our university. We are a very dynamic School of Government. We have very strong research and teaching and master's programs in general public policy evaluation, of course, urban and climate change issues, but also we work with gender issues, public health, artificial intelligence and labor markets, and many other crucial and very important dynamics of our socioeconomic reality. The discussions in the event today will be very, very important, very crucial, especially for emerging markets and middle-income economies as we are, as Argentina is, for example. We have very unequal and very difficult urban situations, and the discussions today regarding financing for transport, housing, and other contemporary urban challenges, I find them very, very important. So again, thank you for being here. Thank you, Cynthia, and organizers for preparing this very, very important event. And I hope you have very constructive and very building discussions today. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dario. Thank you. Thank you for all. So now I'm saying good morning for everyone and good afternoon for those who are not in this area. And I welcome everybody to our panel on global innovations in land-based finance here at the Urban Thinker Campus. I have the honor of giving the floor to a very distinguished group of global experts who will share their insights and the latest innovation, best practices, and opportunities for scaling land-based finance internationally. So, dear colleagues, welcome to our panel discussion on land value capture and its role in promoting sustainable urban development. Let me present the panelists. We are honored to have with us today. First, we have Andrés Fuentes Taylor, who leads the unit in environmental and land use economics in the OECD, Center for Entrepreneurship, Regions and Cities. Andrés has contributed to the OECD Lincoln Institute Global Compendium of Land Value Capture Policies, and he will be talking about that, and has worked on integrating climate neutrality in regional development. Next, we have with us Enrique Silva, the Chief Program Officer of the Lincoln Institute of Land Policy. Enrique oversees the Institute's strategic programs, global initiatives, and annual planning process, and he also leads projects in Africa, and he will be talking about what they are doing in Africa, and I found that very, very interesting, and co-directs the Master of Land Policy and Sustainable Development and teaches at Harvard University Graduate School of Design. And finally, we are pleased to welcome Jane Katz, the Vice Chair and Washington Office's representative of Global Urban Development. Jane serves as the urban focal point to the Senai State Council Advisory Group and is the CSO, co-chair of the UN Habitat World Urban Campaign Steering Committee and General Assembly of Partners. Okay, as you see, each of our panelists brings a unique perspective and expertise to the discussion, and we look forward to hearing their insights and how land value capture can be effectively leveraged to finance sustainable urban development, promote equitable growth, and address the challenges posed by rapid urbanization and climate change. Without further ado, let's begin our discussion. And to ensure a productive and engaging discussion, we have structured the panels to include brief presentations from each panelist. And after the presentations, we will have an engaging, moderated discussion. We'll explore topics like the most promising global land-based finance innovations, lessons from cities that have successfully implemented these models or are working to implement these models, and the key enablers needed to mainstream this approach worldwide. In case you can place a question you want to place a question for our panelists, you can do so in the chat, and we will try to answer them as much as we can. So I'm really excited for what promises to be an insightful and thought-provoking dialogue on this critical issue facing cities globally. So let's get started. Andrés, welcome here.
Thank you very much, Cynthia. Now I have prepared a presentation, and I wonder whether you would probably want me to
Yes,
put it on our screens. So there we go.
excellent.
You can see it well. Good. That's
Yes.
good. So let's get started. So yes, many thanks for this opportunity to present our work on land value capture policy tools here in the OECD Center for Entrepreneurship, SMEs, Regions and Cities to you in the Urban Thinkers campus. Now the principle of land value capture is really very simple. Land value capture policies aim to recover some or even all of the land value increases that public planning and infrastructure investment decisions generate. To recover these value gains in real estate for the public good. And these instruments have a large revenue potential. Land across all 38 OECD countries, we estimate that land is about 30% of the total capital stock. And land values respond strongly to public land use and infrastructure provision decisions. And this is especially true in cities where land tends to be more expensive. A telling example is one that I have that I owe to the Lincoln Land Institute. And of course, we will have a presentation from them as well. And this is the example of the construction of a metro line in 2000 in Manila, which, according to academic research, increased the value of land within 1 kilometer of the metro stations by nearly $3.4 billion US. Whereas the metro line itself cost the city $655 million to build. So the potential revenues were even a multiple of the cost of building the metro line. But I don't think that this potential was actually ever used. And this example describes quite well where we stand with respect to land value capture. A powerful tool that is not used often enough. Because this large revenue potential is important for the massive investment in infrastructure that we need to make cities livable, as we have already heard, livable for all inhabitants, receive all the new city dwellers in coming decades, because urbanization will continue to be on the rise, and make cities sustainable, in particular to slash greenhouse gas emissions and halt climate change. And so this requires a lot of investment in public transport, vegetation, denser development, better buildings, access to safe water and energy, and so on. Land value capture can help pay for all of this. Now, land value capture is of interest from a public finance point of view, not only for its revenue potential. It can also be an economically efficient and equity-enhancing revenue source. This is because land value gains, which result from public infrastructure decisions, are windfall profits for private landowners whose land rises, whose real estate rises in value. These value increases are windfall profits. They're not a return on their own economic activity, such as on their own investment. And when governments tap such windfall profits, they do not generate efficiency losses for economic activity, unlike taxes. So land value capture policies, if well implemented, do not discourage private investment. So this is the efficiency case for land value capture. And then these windfall profits on real estate accrue mostly to wealthy households. And so this can make for an equity case for land value capture. And then for cities, another thing that is interesting is that the time profile of land value capture revenues. Often these revenues can be front-loaded and so reduce borrowing needs. And this is especially interesting for low and middle income countries with more difficult access to international capital markets. And land value capture can provide cities with much needed financial autonomy. Now, despite its economic potentials, land value capture is underutilized across the world. And one reason for it, we think, is that there was too little systematic information on its use across countries. So countries could not really learn from each other. And I'm saying there was too little systematic information because we have created the global compendium of land value capture policies together with the Lincoln Institute for Land Policy for this reason, to fill this gap. Yeah, we released it only in 2022. And this project was also supported by GIZ, the German Development Corporation. Our global compendium draws on land value capture policies in 60 countries. You can see on this map. And we have considered 5 different types of policy instruments. And on this map, you can also see that only some countries use all the 5 instrument types that we have considered in our study. And even those countries that utilize the broad range of instruments, they often do not use these instruments to their full potential. So we distinguish 5 types of land value capture policy instruments. And this is really to show that cities can use these instruments in a broad range of different development contexts. So it's good to have a range of instruments at disposal. So the first one is that I want to describe a little bit is the infrastructure levy. And infrastructure levies, where they are useful, they typically apply when governments build public infrastructure in an area that's already developed. So this would be the example of the Manila metro line project. And as in this example of Manila, well, access to these facilities raises nearby property values. And so benefiting landowners can be asked to pay a levy. And then this levy is often used to pay for part of that project cost. Now, some countries like Colombia or Germany identify whose properties increase in value thanks to the public works with evaluation exercises. And other countries use a simpler impact rule, which spares them from assessing individually which landowners gain. So in Ecuador, for example, or large projects such as tram lines, each benefiting real estate owner pays an amount according to the size and value of the real estate and according to the distance to the new infrastructure. Now, developer obligations apply to a different situation. They are used when land is newly developed. And so developers are asked to pay contribution to obtain permission to develop, for example, a new residential area or a new commercial district. And well, this is based on the fact that the value of the land increases if the project is granted permission. And then again, the contributions often serve to finance the public infrastructure that the residents or the businesses in the new development need. And such contributions from developers can be in cash or can be in kind to provide specific infrastructure as they develop the land. And this is then also an opportunity to make sure urbanization happens in a way that is consistent with sustainability goals. Then moving on to the charges for development rights, well, they apply to land that is already developed, but that is developed further. For example, well, especially to build higher beyond an established building height baseline. Also when governments relax zoning regulations. And a famous example is Sao Paulo. Sao Paulo auctions rights to build above a height baseline. And this auction process then also serves to discover the land value gains that are triggered by allowing to build higher. And one useful application is to combine building heights with requirements to improve energy efficiency of buildings. Then moving on to land readjustment, well, this consists of the pooling of fragmented private land parcels for infrastructure development. After the project is completed, landowners receive back a smaller plot of land that is then still at least as valuable as before, thanks to the development. And so governments receive some of this land and they can use it for the infrastructure, so they don't have to buy it. Or in some cases, they can also sell it on and raise revenues in this way. And so land readjustment has a long history in Japan, for example, including for disaster prevention. And with strategic land management, finally, governments simply buy land at pre-development prices to appropriate the value gain that comes from the development. And so, for example, Paris, where we are located here at OECD, has recently used this strategic land management for the Grand Paris Express train that serves the Paris metropolitan area. And many other countries also allow governments purchasing land at pre-development prices. One sustainability solution, I might say like that land value capture policies can specifically serve are nature-based solutions. Nature-based solutions are policy approaches to leverage nature to protect people, in particular, against extreme climate events. Also in cities. For example, to protect against flood risk. And these nature-based solutions, they're not receiving enough attention in cities. And one reason is that nature-based solutions don't generate revenues. Other types of infrastructure often do generate revenues from fees, user fees. And then also because they require land, nature-based solutions require land, and land is scarce, especially in cities. But nature-based solutions provide well-being benefits, and so they often increase land values. And so land value capture can be a good instrument to make nature-based solutions work, harnessing these land value gains to pay for them. And they can also help deliver the public space that is needed. And for example, in the Indian city of Calcutta, there's an interesting proposal from researchers to use land value capture instruments to improve water retention and expand large green corridors that also serve as public parks as well as flood retention areas with land value capture policies. So the local government can save budgetary resources.
Andres, we have to be rounded in a few minutes.
Okay, very good. I will. I was
in the exchange with the
yes,
other panel.
Yes. So you will see when you. I invite you to consult our global compendium, and you will see we have an assessment of which instruments are used in high-income countries and in low-income countries. Instrument use is different. We also review obstacles to land value capture policy tools. What is important here is, of course, resistance to property owners. And one can think of ways to reduce such resistance, and we can come back to that in the discussion. And in low-income countries, the lack of administrative capacity is also a major impediment, as well as lacking cadasters and land registries. And this we can also get back to in the discussion. So summing up, a land value capture is of great benefit for sustainable urban development if implemented responsibly. So it is also important to avoid the pitfalls. It's a powerful funding instrument. So it is important that it is indeed used for sustainable development. And so that we avoid the pitfall of the temptation to overdevelop and to develop in an unsustainable way. And so this is why local governments should not be dependent on revenues land value capture generates. So land value capture should be one source of revenue among others. We've also seen land value capture can boost equity, but this also depends on how the additional revenues, the resources it provides, how they are used. So this is also important. And then finally, we need to work on the framework conditions that enable land value capture use. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Andres, for this very interesting presentation, and you talk about what the OECD and Lincoln Institute have compiled. This very good, and I invite everybody to see the compendium that you published a few years ago. And now I invite Enrique. Welcome, Enrique, here.
Thank you very much. Buenos días a todas y a todos. Good morning, good evening to everyone. A special thanks to the Universidad Torquato de Tella for the kind invitation, and to the co-organizers. It's really an honor to be part of this great forum, and also be in a panel with friends and colleagues like Andres and Jane. I'm very happy to follow Andres, and I will be speaking and going a little bit deeper into, as Cynthia mentioned, the political challenges, not so much the technical challenges, but the political challenges in promoting and advancing the application of land value capture. And I'm going to do so through an example of a wonderful project that the Institute's been involved in South Africa. I am going to see if I can share my screen. There we go. I hope everyone can see it. So I want to, for those of you that are familiar with the Lincoln Institute of Land Policy, we're based in Cambridge, Massachusetts, and we have offices in Phoenix, Arizona, and China. And we have a 30-year history working in Latin America, and that work in Latin America has really been the work that has fed our understanding, knowledge, and passion for land-based financing. for most of the history of the Institute, and we're going on 80 years, we've advanced a major argument that has land value capture at its core. And that is, in order to meet the demands, the needs, and the challenges of urban issues such as poverty, inequality, and now climate change and ecosystem degradation, we need to fundamentally support the fiscal sustainability of municipal governments. And this is a really important issue and a matter that I hope we address here, that this is not just about land value capture, but it's land value capture in relationship to the role, the vital role that municipal governments play and need to play in order to tackle issues of poverty, inequality, and climate change. And within that, we have to pay close attention to the way, and as it has been mentioned before, that how land and why land is such a valuable asset, but why it's a largely untapped financial resource for municipalities. And within that context, advance the notion that land values are largely conditioned by governmental regulations and investments, and that the uplift that's generated by those administrative acts and investments can be legitimately recovered by the government in order to finance projects or recover the cost of projects or finance future projects. And as Andres showed, there's a whole set of tools that represent that the application of the concept of land value capture. You might get bored of hearing or reading the definition of land value capture, but it's worth repeating because it's a wonderfully simple but frustratingly challenging concept to apply. Land value capture refers to the recovery by the public of the land value increments or the unearned income generated by actions other than the landowner's direct investments. And again, why do we support land value capture? I'm not going to repeat much of what Andres said because Andres really covered it well. There are very pragmatic reasons for supporting land value capture or land-based financing. Most municipalities are literally sitting on untapped resources that could fund many of their agendas and planning initiatives. There is a very strong equity component and argument for the application of land-based financing, and I'm happy to discuss those either later on in the discussion. And there are also efficient ways of applying the land value capture tools in land-based financing in general. So I think you all know the answer to this. Sounds pretty easy, doesn't it? Well, as you know, as Andres hinted before, it might sound easy. It might sound common sense. It might seem very commonsensical, if that's even a term. But it is amazingly difficult to apply and to advance at the local, national, and even global levels. So if you will indulge me, I will talk now about, and I will invoke my dear colleague, Martin Smolka, from whom you'll hear later on, the three I's that represent the major challenges to the application and advancement of land value capture. And I will modestly and humbly add a fourth I. And I'm doing this to frame the context of the project that I will be talking about that I mentioned that we're working on in South Africa. The first challenge is ignorance. And this is not a small challenge, and it's not necessarily one that should make anyone feel insulted by it. But what we found in our work at the Institute, and what we also found in the work in the lead up to the compendium, is that many local governments, actually national, especially national governments, regional and local governments, really do not know about the land value capture as a concept, much less as a tool, even though they have there's a legal framework in many places that would allow the use of land value capture. So there's a general ignorance, and one of the reasons we decided to partner with the OECD on the compendium was to really systematically document and demonstrate and make accessible the ranges of uses of land value capture and the demonstration of the tools based on and linking them to the concept of land value capture and the definition of land value capture. There's another dimension of ignorance that's really important to keep in mind here, is that most of the people that lead, or the officers that lead, the financial issues in cities and the planning issues really do not understand or know about land markets and the dynamics around land markets and worse so, the relationship between public investments and public actions and the land value increases. So if you don't know what you're doing as a planner or as a city and the investments in relationship to land values, you won't know that you have an opportunity or that you're actually impacting or having an effect, and sometimes a very positive effect on the property values. The other challenge, the other I, are interests and the resistance, as Andres had mentioned, in particular around property owners to participate and to even accept the notion of land value capture. And here, what's interesting is the battle around the concept of unearned income and to whom does the uplift in property values belong? Does it fully belong to the property owner? Basic question, is government action really affecting values, and do they really have a claim? And ultimately, so the question is, whose interests are at play, who can benefit and who can not benefit from the application of land value capture? And here, the place the sector to really focus on in most places is the private property owners and their relationship to the concept and the potential of its application, as well as the developer or the real estate development sector in a given city. The other challenge to the advancement and application of land value capture tends to be bureaucratic inertia. Again, and this goes hand in hand with the ignorance or lack of knowledge of the potential to apply or the opportunity to apply land value capture in localities. And we can't underestimate how hard it is to change habits and practices at the municipal level in cases where the tools don't exist but could exist, and how long it's going to take to build the capacity and interest within local governments to adopt and then ultimately apply and sustain the application of land value capture tools. And then my humble contribution to the I's as challenges to land value capture is the eligibility, and that's not even a word, and I concede that, but I needed to get the I out there. Oftentimes, how the illegible here refers to how important it is to be very, very clear in the ways that local authorities or advocates of land value capture describe and communicate what the concept is, the rationale behind it, and also the reasons why it's being applied. This also applies to the clarity or the transparency of the tools and how they're framed in the legal codes. And this is really important, and this is related to inertia. If a government or a legislature creates a law that allows for land value capture, it's really important that that law be clear, or the tools that it allows the community to employ be clear, so that folks know why it's being used and how it could be used. So again, I just wanted to frame this more clearly. These are what we consider the political challenges. This is a very light approach to describing those challenges, but I hope I convey the point. So now I want to talk about the National Land Value Capture Dialogues in South Africa, which is a project that is now, we're concluding phase 1. It's been a 4-year project that the Institute has developed in partnership with South Africa's National Treasury, specifically its City Support Program, and the leadership and the partnership with the Development Action Group, a nonprofit housing advocacy group based in Cape Town. And you will be hearing, I was very happy to learn, you'll be hearing from Helen Rourke of JAG in a later session, and she will go into much more detail in some of the aspects of this project. But this was an initiative that was born, that was formally launched in the depths of COVID in 2020, but that has a history that was being developed prior to 2020. The vision behind the National Dialogues on Value Capture in South Africa is to see a world in South Africa where the municipalities have the capacity, the knowledge, and the support to implement and institutionalize relevant and effective land value capture tools within their toolbox, revenue-raising toolbox. And very specifically, and this is very specific to the South African context, the link and the desire is to enable and support the fiscal health of local governments for them to be able to enact and implement the spatial transformation agenda within South Africa, which is essentially trying to right the wrongs and rebuild and reconstruct in a much more equitable ways the apartheid cities that South Africa has inherited over the 30 years. And the mission of the dialogues is primarily to strengthen the capacity of the local governments in partnership, and this is very important, in partnership with the national government, with the support of the Treasury, for the implementation of land value capture. But it's also, and this is a recognition of the broader need to engage communities and advocates in land value capture for the support of its implementation. It's to build a capacity not only of the local government, but of environmental advocates, housing advocates, academics, practitioners, to support and engage with government to support their use and desire to use land value capture. So it's essentially to create a community that is aware of the concept of land value capture and its relevance to support fiscally sound communities. Now, the dialogue started in 2020, but the inception or the idea was triggered by a partnership that we had with DAG that goes back to 2018, and it might have been 2017, my COVID brain. Pre-COVID, I forget the dates of when things started, but before 2020, in a visit to Cape Town, a Lincoln Institute visit to Cape Town, where we met and caught up with our colleagues at DAG, DAG brought us to the city hall and introduced us to a counselor and the lead for the transportation and planning division of Cape Town, what then council member Brett Herron, to talk about his agenda primarily for housing and his desire and interest to look into land value capture as a way to finance housing policy and the spatial transformation agenda in Cape Town. And this was also in the context where the city was in a major stalemate between developers, the city, and housing advocates around the creation of new housing, where another NGO, Mpuna Ukwazi, was challenging both the city and developers around installing building permits because those developments were not being designed or are being prepared for including or addressing the spatial transformation needs of Cape Town. And so within that context, we were asked as an institute to come in and play the role of the facilitator and create a dialogue within the city with key stakeholders, the city, the developers, academics, and housing advocates, to talk about and to lay a level playing field of understanding of the concept of land value capture. So consider land value capture 101 for all actors, not with an idea to create a consensus or a particular strategy, but to level the playing field of knowledge and understanding and to allow everyone to use the same language when talking about financing, spatial transformation, and land value capture. And so what we did was create a set of dialogues that were informed by empirical evidence, research. We brought all the stakeholders together. We co-educated ourselves on the concept of land value capture. And that, what was amazing and transformative over the course of the year was creating some change and some movement and some willingness within the Cape Town set of stakeholders to look at and consider land value capture tools, in particular inclusionary housing, to advance everyone's interest and then break through the logjam of the housing issues in that city. Those dialogues inspired the development and the engagement of and caught the attention of the National Treasury, who is also looking for ways to support local governments across the country to embrace alternative sources of revenue, in particular land-based financing and land-based revenues. And it was through those dialogues that we decided to team together and develop a national level strategy based on dialogues and the components of key dialogues, which were community building or developing communities of practice, generating local research and an understanding of the local land markets, local understandings and applications of value capture tools in the legal frameworks, and then also creating another set of tools and supports to educate and then bring people together. Again, and we did this with an idea of engaging the 8 metros, the 8 largest municipalities in the country, to, again, have a collective, a city level dialogue, but then a national level dialogue on the relevance and importance of land-based finance as a concept, and what tools would be available and are available for the cities. And so in a very crude sense, this was a technical support initiative. But what was innovative here is that all of the work about creating communities of practice, deploying research, and even bringing in new cohorts of practitioners and bringing in interns, so students, into the mix, was to create an ecosystem of knowledge sharing and co-production and understanding, hopefully creating a shared lexicon or language around land value capture and financing to support the specific agendas of the cities, and also to support Treasury in its own larger national strategic level plan for supporting municipalities and getting them to access their own source revenue through land. So because this was a national level initiative that worked again at the city level, it also worked at the province level, but at the national, we were deployed over the course of the 4 years in different conversations to bring together, sometimes nationally, leaders and planners from the major cities. But then we would go, once we understood the needs of the different cities and the interest at in each city around the application of land value captures, we would go down and work with the colleagues at the city level, and then again, deploy the same tools, support the creation of a community of practice around land value capture, support the generation of research that was specific to the needs of their of the cities, and there again, and then what that allowed us to do was to look at different instruments based on the different needs of each city. The results over 4 years were amazing, and I think none of us really expected so much movement. The biggest success, and I think Helen will talk about this later this afternoon, was that the province of the Western Cape developed its own inclusionary housing framework for the entire province in support of cities like Cape Town, who also were looking for ways to adopt and implement inclusionary housing policies. The community of Stellenbosch readapted its redevelopment plan, the Adam Task Corridor, with land value capture tools, anticipating the potential of using land value capture tools. And then we contributed a whole suite of reports to strengthen the knowledge around the South African context for context and capacity for the municipalities to adopt and implement land value capture tools. I need to close. We've taken the success of the South African dialogues has been such that we've taken it on the road, and we've engaged with other countries in South-to-South dialogues to explain and talk about what was going on in South Africa. We had a dialogue sponsored by GIZ with India, and we participated in the Beirut Urban Lab City debates just last year to discuss this. And then there have been many, many other fora. We talked about the case in GLTN as well. I want to leave everyone with this last slide. So I talked about the challenges of land value capture in terms of the 3 of the 4 I's, but really what those represent, and this is really kind of instead of, I want to bring it down to the individual, our own individual level, our embrace and our capacity to advocate for or not advocate for land value capture goes through our own understanding and positions on very key issues. What is our position? What is your position on the social function of land? What is your position around the reach of government and planning to shape land markets and redirect the wealth that's generated through investments in the city? What is your position between property rights versus development rights, and then or charging for those? And then at the end of the day, what is it that you would do with those land values? And then the point here is that we often don't pay enough attention to dialogue, and hopefully what this case study will do is give you a really strong impression that dialogues do matter to get the ball rolling in places that haven't really fully embraced land value capture but are interested in doing that. So sorry if I went over time. Thank you so much for your attention.
Thank you, Enrique. Very interesting presentation. I'm wondering if you believe that this model can be replicated or adapted to another context or regions, but we perhaps we can have time to answer that later. I want to welcome Jane Katz. Welcome here. I'm very glad that you are participating today. So the floor is yours.
Yeah, let me see if I can pull it up here. Great. Before I get going, I did want to mention that that this is being brought to you by the Urban Thinkers Campus of UN Habitat, and we're very pleased to be able to help to be a co-organizer of the Urban Thinkers Campus of UN Habitat. So I just wanted to note that for those who are joining a little bit late. So I was asked to actually talk a little bit more about, in the broad sense, of what UN Habitat's work has been on land-based financing and the implementation of a learning series through the Global Landfill Network. And if I have some time, I'll also mention and talk a little bit about the World Bank's Land and Poverty Conference, which was held for the first time since 2019, which has been an annual event and had been canceled due to COVID. And we've heard a little bit about that from Enrique. And I thank you for inviting me as well. So I'm going to actually pull out a little bit here and talk a little bit about the land-based financing in general, and provide more of an overview of the work of UN Habitat and Global Landfill Network and others in this space. So it's more of a high level. So I will be doing a little bit more around some surveys of different things that have been going on and activities that have been going on with some of the experts. So I'll start with the definition of land-based financing from UN Habitat. And we've heard a little bit about that already, but it's a collective name given to a range of instruments by which local governments expand their revenue base and generate funds that will help them realize their service delivery, infrastructure development, and maintenance goals. But it's also a tool that's premised on the fact that urban land is a key factor of production and an important source of financing for urban development, including infrastructure, social, housing, and basic services. And I do want to say that that it does include nature-based solutions too. So we do talk a little bit about the rural aspects and not just the urban aspects of this. But thanks for that. Here a second. Okay. So I'm going to talk now a little bit about something called a learning series that the Global Landfill Network introduced. But before I do want to say what the Global Landfill Network is. For those of you who aren't familiar with it, UN Habitat has been the Secretariat of the Global Landfill Network, and it is actually a multi-sectoral alliance of international, national, local partners who are committed to increasing access to land and tenure security for all. It focuses a lot on the stakeholders, and including those who are poor, those women and youth who will really need access to secure land. So this is what the land-based financing learning series is started in the late 2020. And that was right around the time of COVID. And UN Habitats introduced this new series on land-based financing, bringing together the partners, the GLTN partners, academics, experts, implementers, to learn about advances in research and tools and good practices and innovations and challenges, and also to create collaboration for and opportunities for collaboration. So the first set of services is what in the learning series, what they had is 4 different learning series beginning in 2020. So series 1 to 3 was really from mostly done online until we were able to be in person. But because of COVID, I think it was also felt that this would be a way of also bringing together the partners to talk about some of the land-based financing information and different types of tools that have been introduced, and also the political and policy aspects of it as well. So the first year of the series, it was more about leveraging land for delivery of services, building the social contract, and promoting peace and security. 4 sessions that were held that year started with really a presentation about how to, and just share with you that the first one that we had was one of the academics, Larry Walters, who was from the Utah State Tax Commission, and it was really a session on where do you start, and really bringing in a whole host of information. The Global Landfill Network had prepared a training module previous to that that is also available. But the series, the first series, was leveraging land, why, what, and how. And in addition to this presentation, there were a number of other sessions that talked about the principles of property taxation design, governance, land value capture, which we've been hearing about, leveraging partner initiatives. And we see that many of our partners from the Global Landfill Network are here today. And also financing affordable housing and participatory slum upgrading were some of the areas that were covered in its first series. And based on the success of that series, we moved on in 2021 to a series 2, which also was contained 6 sessions. So you can see that we've had a lot of online conversations. But series 2 and 3 were held along the same theme of leveraging land for delivery of services, and building the social contract, and promoting peace and security. But it was expanded a little bit, and they now address topics around dynamics of local central government collaboration, which provided examples from different countries, and land-based financing in fragile states, which was also addressed, some of the lessons and opportunities. And then we also had land-based financing interventions and lessons that were had from some of the more high conflict states, such as Afghanistan and Somalia, and introduced a new learning stream focused on case studies and problem solving. Series 3 efforts were more around a continuation of what we talked about before, but also offered up some additional tools and other aspects of property taxation and revenue reform, as well as focusing on land, housing, and shelter financing more broadly. That series ran from April 2023 to the end of 2023, and also had some new learning streams. It also introduced something called the Rapid Own Source Revenue Analysis, which was a tool for own source revenue self-optimization, which I could tell you what the description is, but I think I'll leave it at that for now. And if anyone has any questions, I'll be happy to define it. So taking us to more present conversations around land-based financing, in 2024, earlier this year, was introduced a new theme, and that is land-based finance policy innovations and implications for leveraging land for building social contract, service delivery, and governance. The expectation is that it will be 4 sessions, and the first session that was held back in March was the land question underpinning the affordable housing crisis. And I just wanted to note that UN Habitat and Global Landfill Network and the World Urban Campaign are focusing now on a campaign around land issues. And so the World Urban Campaign is very engaged in terms of the campaign, which is called Housing Matters, and addresses the worldwide housing crisis. And I think we saw some numbers earlier about the 3 billion people who, at least 3 billion people, about 40% of the world's population would need adequate housing. So right now we're focusing on the land question. And the first session that was addressed was the land question underpinning the affordable housing crisis. We had as a presenter Astrid Haas, who talked about the enabling factors for land-based financing for adequate housing. And we had commentators and a dialogue around land-based financing tools to be considered when addressing affordable housing and the affordable housing crisis. So some of these you've already heard about, certainly. These were some of the tools that were discussed were property taxes, which we heard about, developer obligations, which we heard a little bit about earlier as well, which is cash or in-kind contributions that defray costs for additional infrastructure or services that need to be provided due to private development. The vacant land tax, which really is a subset of the land tax that is levied on underdeveloped or underutilized land. And an example of that might be, I recall that in a visit to Santo Domingo, there are properties that are considered vacant in the sense that they're open topped, where there are a lot of squatters who are sitting on this land in the city, and they're not being taxed because they're not being utilized at all. And working with the Inter-American Development Bank has tried to revitalize that area as well. The density bonus is, I guess you could say, charges in cash or in kind, which are payable for additional development rights beyond those which are zoned for a particular area. And then finally, tax incremental financing was also discussed. The session itself also addressed an expert group meeting that UN Habitat held. And so right now, the next steps are for this series is very timely because there is going to be a session that's taking place on June the 17th for those who are interested in participating. And they're going to be taking a look at some of the things that we want to talk about and tools going forward. Some of the other issues that have been coming up and that we've also seen is the climate impact, and we have a panel today that's going to be talking about that. It's talking more about data, because underlying all of the work that we're doing is being able to access data and being able through some of these new technologies that we're able to access better data using drones and AI and various other new things. And then we're also talking about more on the policy implications and policy changes. And I think, as Enrique talked about, as well as the social implications. So that's what's next. I put a little slide in here because of the differences that we see of collecting financing through a city like Hong Kong versus something where we have spread out infrastructure of homes in Kibera, which how do you actually access the funds that you need for the city when they're in settlements? So I think that's something that we're going to want to a little talk about later. So briefly, I thought I'd also just mention the World Bank Land and Poverty Conference. And this was the first time, as I mentioned, it was held in May of this year. So it just happened a few weeks ago. The theme of the conference itself was securing land tenure and access for climate action. And it had 4 sub-themes: secure tenure for sustainability, land technologies for green growth, a session on land administration for climate action and disaster resilience. And then I think where land-based financing came in a little bit more was in the land administration amid rapid urbanization sessions that were held. And rather than go into details about this, the way the conference was run was that there were plenaries, breakout sessions, research, and trainings. And I'd be happy to talk a little bit more about some of the some of the different sessions that were held. One thing that I thought was interesting was that in the opening session, Dr. Andrew Steer, who provided the keynote and is from the Bezos Fund, did highlight the need for financial innovation and also brought up land value capture. So I thought that was something that really struck a chord. So thank you. And I'm happy to engage now in dialogue with the rest of you.
Yeah, thank you, Jane.
Sure.
It's impressive the amount of work that you have been doing, and you raised very interesting issues. Let me ask you something. Andres mentioned that land value capture is underutilized, especially among low and middle income countries. And Enrique presents some motivation for that, some reasons. But the question is, how can these countries be supported in adopting and implementing land value capture more effectively? Andres talked about information, that's what the compendium has done. Enrique talked about the South African model, and I want to ask you if this can be replicated or adapted to other contexts or regions, and what will be the key factors for success. And Jane, you talk about these type of activities that you are organizing, and based on the outcomes and in this and based on the outcomes and incidents of this learning series that you have developed, do you believe that this model can be replicated or adapted in other contexts or regions? What would be the key factors for success? So we are trying to talk between us on how we can expand the implementation of land-based finance based on your experience or what you think it will be feasible in different contexts.
Did you want me to start or Enrique? I mean, I would say that his model is replicable.
Yeah, no, thank you for asking. And well, it is replicable, and we're replicating it as literally as we speak. We've developed a set of dialogues in Lebanon in partnership with the American University of Beirut there. And what's interesting there is that it started off, and this is the importance of the process, the model of the dialogues. It started off as dialogues around land value capture, but as we got the major stakeholders together, including the local governments and national governments, the ministry and so forth, and that's part of one of it's like getting the key stakeholders involved. We realized that the base, there was a just much more fundamental issue around the systems, the valuation systems and the data in Lebanon, and an understanding of how fragmented that is. So it went from dialogues on land value capture, understanding that concept, but then realizing that in order to make any headway from a policy perspective and an institutional perspective, they needed to address issues around valuation. So the dialogues have transformed into national dialogues around valuation and then the relationship of the property tax. And we're also now in conversations with replicating the model in Kisumu, Kenya, and we're hoping, that's we're working there. The secret sauce, I think, here, and this is very important for the middle and lower income countries, especially those countries that are highly centralized countries, is that while we're focusing on the local government, you need national level government engagement. They're a major support, and the signal around the use and I think this is what we're learning in South Africa. It was national treasury signaling to its metros, we want to support you in finding new mechanisms for own source revenue. I won't get into the broader context for why, but they were there, and you should experiment. So in those cases where they haven't, the dialogues created an environment or a forum where the government can signal its intent, can signal its support, and then provide the support that's needed in order to enable local governments. The other thing that we're discovering, and we discovered this through, we've discovered it in our work in Latin America on land value capture, but then it was confirmed at the national level, at the global level when we did the compendiums. A lot of places are applying value capture in one form or another. They just don't necessarily know about it and speak of it in those terms. And so in those cases, it's about enforcing and kind of supporting them and say, you're already doing it. And again, it comes comes out of conversation. And what was interesting with the compendium was because the compendium was generated by a survey. We spent a lot of time creating a survey to understand who's doing value capture in ways that don't mention the tools or the common use of the tools, but the dynamics the process in there, so people could self-identify. The name then comes later because people use different names for different tools, but the function and the practice is there. So it's supporting those, it's daylighting those practices, but again, especially in centralized places, national government support. And then encouragement and encouragement around risk taking, because it could be a risky venture to do this. That needs to be supported. And I think what we're seeing in the dialogues is that it creates an environment with the stakeholders to either foster that support or at least own the fact that they don't want to get involved, which is at least honesty or transparency around will is afforded.
Thank you.
Yeah. If you want me also to come in, Cynthia, yes. From our work on the global compendium, we have seen that major barriers are owner resistance in high and low and middle income countries alike, and in lower income countries, it's the lack of administrative capacity. And so, yes, as Enrique has already said, it looks important that central governments take a role. And land value capture is something for local governments, but local governments need a legal basis for implementing these tools, and they need guidelines on how they can use them. And we've seen in our work that land value capture policy instruments are challenged in court. In most countries, at least sometimes. It's especially infrastructure charges. And there are some instruments that get challenged more often. And so, yeah, a solid legal basis is important, and not all countries have it. And we have it we know from anecdotal evidence, the local governments, they would like to use these tools, but they are scared that developers will turn around and challenge them in court because there's no law to support it. Then it's
yeah. No, and
yeah.
I think just adding to that as well, I think underlying all of this is being in some of the lesser developed countries where you don't have really good cadasters and good data. It's difficult to make those valuations. They can be tapped. And so I think that's something that actually we need to have some more of the new technology to be able to assess the values and then to convey those and work with the governments on this. There's also the political implications, I think, that you mentioned earlier, the policy changes that need to happen in some of these countries as well, or some of the local government challenges.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. There are also ways to work around these challenges. So where market-based valuation of land and of value uplifts it's difficult. That's why I mentioned the example of Ecuador. One can use proxies, such as distance to a new metro station, and to charge according to that distance. In Ecuador, that seems to work very well, as far as I know. From our experience with the Global Compendium, it also looks useful to integrate these land value capture policy tools in urban planning and permitting processes. It's just part of it. So if you ask for a building permit, if you ask for permission to develop it, then that's just part of it. And then it also gets integrated into capacity building more easily. And we see that countries that are relatively strong, like Germany and Korea on developer obligations. They do that. It's just part of the process.
Martin has a comment in the chat. I don't know, a strong message when conveying the relevance of land value capture to context whereby resistance is that it cannot be done, is to show that they're already doing it out of good sense in many circumstances. They're not realizing it.
Yes, that's
Thanks,
what
Martin.
shows that many countries are doing that, but they don't know that it's called land-based finance or land value capture.
Right,
and that is
exactly.
Let me ask you something more, and then we are going to close because we are running out of time. Successful land value capture implementation is, we agree, that requires strong management skills, understanding land market conditions, comprehensive property monitoring systems, and dialogue between entities, national government, local governments, and communities too. So in your opinion, how can cities work to develop these capacities, and what challenges remain in institutional coordination and data management based on your experience? And by the other side, what are the most promising opportunities or innovations and how your organizations are supporting countries in leveraging these opportunities for climate, for example, for climate action or affordable housing or inclusive growth? I ask this to make you the final comments on this panel.
Oh, I can give a counter, well, not a counterintuitive, but so there's a lot of focus on capacity building and training, and you need that. You need both people and skilled people. I would make an argument for, and then it's great that the forum is happening within the university. We really, really, really need to catch the public officials that will be public officials at the moment they're being educated with these principles in mind, so that before they go out into the field, they know about these things and they can hit the ground running or be advocates for it. Especially in planning programs or even in public finance or public administration, these themes don't intersect. The finance, land markets, economics don't intersect. The Lincoln Institute has a long and wonderful history with partners such as Goytia and Tella to think about the education of future officials and practitioners and policymakers on these themes, so that we're not always behind and doing capacity building for the people that are already on the ground, which is very important, but it's overwhelming, and at the same time, it's just difficult. So how do we catch them before and then create a mass of people that already know these principles and have it hardwired so when they arrive at the local government, they can advocate, if not just apply it.
Very good point. I totally agree with you. And that is quite very, very important. Andres, do you want to say something? And Jane?
Andres,
well, just briefly, well, I think that's when there's an important role there for central governments. And so it's for central governments, as they create the legal frameworks, it's to also to support the education and the training that also Enrique has been talking about.
Yeah,
I leave it to Jane to continue.
Yeah, I would say I come more from the advocacy side. And we're just finding out when they talked about the Summit for the Future that urban issues aren't even being captured at all in the Pact for the Future. So I think we need to do a lot of work on advocating for land issues. I think Andrew Steer, when he was talking in his opening remarks, talked about that we need to make land more important, and it needs to be highlighted in more forums, that the whole issues of this with local government and national governments, bringing them together as well as other stakeholders, is a very important key.
You're right, and that's why we organized this Urban Thinker Campus, and we are very happy to have you join your opinions and your views about the subject. And thank you all a lot for being here.
Yes.
Thank you. And in a few minutes, we are going to start the next panel. And well, bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Okay, we are inviting to the next panel to Eric Heckila, which is, well, a very well-known academic and friend. And I'm very happy that he woke up very early in Hong Kong to be present here. Hello, Eric. And also, the panel will be joined by other colleagues and experts from all over the world. So the floor is yours, Eric. Welcome.
Well, thank you so much, Cynthia. Just make sure that you can hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, very good. And so I'd like to welcome the other panelists. I saw Alex Lord just recently, and I do see Daniel Kozak. So why don't I begin with my introduction? First of all, welcome, Daniel. It's nice to meet you virtually. Look forward to doing so in person. Daniel Kozak is Director of Research Center Habitat and Energy and Professor at University of Buenos Aires, and has a very interesting case study from Buenos Aires to share with us. I'd like to invite the other panelists to jump in, please. And yes, now I think we all know Cynthia, who is really our fearless leader in this, and who has set a very high bar for me in terms of moderating a session, but she's here to step in should I fall short. And Cynthia, of course, I think everybody knows here, is professor here at University Torquato di Tella, and is, in my humble opinion, a real thought leader globally in terms of urban land management and its effect on housing. And Mr. Alex Lord, or if I might call you Lord Alex, but I guess that's not allowed because the comma would have to be there, yes, is the Lever Chair of Urban and Regional Planning, Department of Geography and Planning at University of Liverpool. Perhaps my friend Peter Beatty.
I do. I know him very well. He was the previous Lever Chair of Town and Regional Planning here. He recruited me to Liverpool some years ago.
Oh, fantastic. Please say hello to him for me.
Sure.
And also joining us is Anthony Buonada Fuchs. Am I pronouncing that correctly?
So one of some of the few people, yes, absolutely. That was well pronounced.
So I should quit while I'm ahead. Professor at St. Gallen University in Switzerland, who has also has brought us an interesting case study from India and drawing on experiences from elsewhere. And just to sort of allow everyone to anticipate, also Alex will be bringing us some useful case studies from a set of cities in China, as well as drawing from elsewhere. And I'm going to ask Cynthia.
For starting, let me present Eric, because I didn't do that, and I'm going to do that. Eric is professor in the University of Southern California School of Public Policy and during the year 2023-2024, he is Vice Chancellor, Distinguished Visiting Professor of the Chinese University of Hong Kong. His most recent book is China from U.S. Policy Perspective, edited by Routledge. And he's trained as an economist and with professional experience as an urban planner. His current work explored the interaction between formal land use regulation and their impacts on housing and welfare outcomes in metropolitan regions around the world. And he is my co-author in very interesting research projects that we are carrying on together. So welcome, Eric, now again.
Thank you, Cynthia. And perhaps the most important thing to know about me, though, is I am a ruthless timekeeper. And so in the interest of sort of preserving, because I think we have, I've been able to preview the presentations, and I know we have a lot of information, good content that each of you will be delivering singly. But I think that I'd like to ask each of you to keep some guidelines in mind. Really, the value of this kind of interaction is where we can talk to each other and talk to members of the audience who can relay us questions, because we could all record individual presentations and send them in. So I'd like to really be quite strict in keeping this. So what I'll ask is when I turn to each of you for your turn to present, I'm going to ask each of the others, including myself, to turn off the video. And when we do that, I'm going to start my timer for 12 minutes. And after 12 minutes, when it starts beeping, I will put my screen back on. So when you see my face again, that means you've pretty much run out of time. And I will give up to 3 minutes beyond my reappearance. After 3 minutes, I will begin talking as though your presentation is over, thereby becoming a self-fulfilling prophecy. So that's one of my only virtues as a moderator, is I really look to conserve time for the general session that will come later. The other bit of request I have that as a guideline for each of you is, since I think we all have been listening to the prior session, which was very informative and focused on a lot of the kind of the basic groundwork for land-based financing tools. So I'd like to ask us in this session not to be repeating that, right? People don't have to come to session 2 to hear what session 1 said. So I'd like to each of you to really think about your value added above and beyond what's already been provided. And that'll be enriching. And to that end, I'd like to remind us all that this session is focusing on the linkage between land-based financing and climate change action, particularly at the level of, subnational level of governments. So with that in mind, let's think about, as we're listening to the presentations, as we're making the presentations, as we're asking questions, let's think about that linkage between land-based financing and climate change. And we can think about that in 2 directions. One is, if we're just thinking about land-based financing, we could be thinking about all the different things that we can be using the revenue that land-based financing might generate. All kinds of things. Out of all those things, why might we want to prioritize climate change action with respect to that particular tool? Likewise, if we turn it around and think about it from the perspective of climate change action and all the funding that's needed and all the things that we need to do, and all the possible sources of funding that might be used, why land-based financing? So both directions. So I think that will be, if we're able to get some traction on that through the presentations and through the ensuing conversation, including audience participation. So I'd like to ask those in the audience to be really thinking about how we can use the time that we're going to save by being strict on the time of the presentations. Let's make that a key focus of what we do. So that's my suggestion. And I'm going to ask if Cynthia would be kind enough to go at the end, partly because she's been going nonstop and she probably needs a break, but partly because I find her presentation to be very much a kind of an overview. And so that'll be a nice way to transition from the individual case studies back into the more general discussion. So with that in mind, Anthony, would you be kind enough to lead us off? And when Anthony begins, can the rest of us turn off our video like that? And when you see me again, Anthony, you'll know that your time is almost up. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Eric. Okay, that will be my goal. To make sure that I don't see your face. I prepared a presentation that presents on the one hand a case in the beginning, and afterwards I have some slides that can be short or not. I want to thank all the organizers for this opportunity. It's an Urban Thinker campus that we have co-organized already on several occasions. This one is on a topic I think that couldn't be more timely, considering what was happening in Brazil and in Argentina. I think it's a good moment also to discuss how, in a broader perspective, land-based finance could be used to implement projects to counter the effects of climate change. So just that I have said it, I want to thank Smartly and Tella for organizing it, but also more organizing the Global Urban Development Unit and the International Association of Architects, the Union of Architects, and the University of St. Gallen. Quickly to myself, I'm Anthony Bonanno-Fuchs. I'm working for the University of St. Gallen. I'm a lecturer at the moment, and I've done extensive research on urban planning mechanism and therefore also on land-based finance. I will quickly share my presentation. So that I hope you can see my slides. I suppose Eric will be happy to see that there are not too many. I want to cover 3 points, and probably I will focus very much on research that I've done during my PhD on India, because I think there are a lot of interesting aspects. It's also considered a certain best practice, but as a PhD is always one of the opportunities where you really dive very deeply into a case. I could also show that behind this best practice, there are a lot of things that are suboptimal, and I think this is very good for the debate, also looking at the political economy of land-based finance, etc. Working for the University of St. Gallen with a representation in Latin America also allowed me to gain additional experience in Latin American ways of land-based finance, particularly land value capture mechanism. And towards the end, I hope when I see Eric's face, I will probably fast forward to this slide. I want to ask more questions and provide answer for the debate that I'm also looking forward to. So my PhD thesis was on Gujarat that had a very interesting application of land-based finance. It's a land readjustment and rent pooling mechanism. And I analyzed this within a larger question about how land for housing and housing is produced, etc., in the city. So it was just part of a puzzle piece of a larger picture. And it is interesting. So you see the very structured way of Indian planning with development plans and so master plans and town planning schemes, which are then the ones that are based on land pooling and readjustments. So over there, areas of 1 square kilometers were singled out and then planned according to the urban function. So it was actually a very perfect tool to, on the one hand, reorganize territories to accommodate better urban planning, and therefore also, for example, other considerations like climate change and resilience. At the same time, it provided the mechanism to via land reservation and sales also to finance all those works that are required. And so it worked relatively well because everyone who knows a little bit about Indian planning, it's reputed due to like very rigid structure with roots in colonial past, very low densities to have caused a lot of problems. And this was also like a situation in Ahmedabad in Gujarat in the end of the 20th century. And then through very small reforms, this became actually very, very functional. So the reforms are interesting because it was actually in some small details. For example, by concentrating that only the planning, the design part of those plans need to be finished, that you can move forward, and all the financial parts, including the payment of betterment charges, the evaluations, etc., were dealt in a later process. So it became much more speedier. Instead of taking decades of implementing a plan, it was done then in very, very short period of time, in a couple of months. Still, despite that, really they managed from reactive planning, that urbanization preceded planning, to a proactive planning, and financing works, and it worked relatively well. You also saw that a lot of things were not optimal. This is just with the fact, like, the political economy of development, and that within the decisions of land readjustment, you have actually a lot of decisions that can't be completely codified, regulated. So in those decisions, like, for example, where to allocate the lands, etc., and also informal practices, there were a lot of problems occurring of like accumulation of personal wealth and so on. I won't go into those details. And there was also a structural problem that the property valuation, the official property valuation, was dysfunctional, indicating very, very low official terms to save on property taxes, and this was basically used to evaluate the compensation rates and the betterment charges that contributed very, very little. So in the end, it worked, but it worked not ideally. From this, there are also other cases over here, yeah. In India and Gujarat that might be giving some ideas for the later discussions. I mean, obviously they have a very long tradition in transferable development rights, with singling out areas of sending and receiving additional development benefits, and these were also used for different mechanisms. What I find particularly interesting with that debate on climate change is the transferable development rights they attributed to private people to finance heritage conservations, because I think a similar idea, trying to, if you want to obtain a certain goal, like, for example, investing in resilient structure, could be also via this mechanism, transferable development rights, that could be sold to developers, to private market actors, and they could be implemented then in other areas. So it's a form of additional currency. There were also a lot of partnership models, institute slum redevelopment. They were completely financed via a market mechanism, the entire structure, etc. So just via land-based financing. They're also upgrading and partnership models that were with small intervention, where they were made possible via extending tenure security to existing slums. And this will connect to a point I'm raising later on, because with all the mechanism that I've analyzed so far, there's always a problem, is how to make it operational and accessible for informal urbanization of cities and slums. So now it wouldn't be already a problem with Eric face appears. I will just walk you quickly. Our institute that is operational in Latin America since 2018, and allowed me also to gain additional experience in Latin American cases. So we've done small and larger projects on land-based financing, particularly land value capture for example, in Colombia. But we also have had a look here how things work in Brazil with the metro line in Sao Paulo, etc. We have more recently looked in the municipal finance options, particularly with regard of secondary cities, and there what kind of options, land-based and non-land-based, are available for local governments. We have analyzed business improvement areas that are a very interesting tool also to advance via private interest a larger goal. They are normally focused on environmentally upgrading areas, but they could be very well connected also with concerns for climate change and resilience. And we looked more broadly into slum upgrading with an interest is like how these mechanisms could actually be activated for slums and informal urbanization, where you have the problem of the land property, particularly on typing. So what are the main finds and challenges? Now we'll have to click a little bit. So, I mean, we see just by set of mechanisms that land-based finance is growing in importance. There's just more and more investment, even international investment, into real estate, and in primary input to realize real estate is land. So we see that in the appreciation of land prices, and with it becomes the possibilities that can be realized with land-based finance. We have seen that the particular land value capture is a very good way to finance projects. We also see that it is probably a little bit more difficult and stands in certain conflict with longer term planning. So it provides a certain project lens on issues. We also see that that land-based finance can contribute strongly to an emancipation of local governments by providing them with their own revenue with a certain liberty. But on the other hand, even the simplest one, like what we would say, like the property tax collection, etc., are administrative relatively complex, particularly if you look at transparency and justice principles. So all these solutions might be to a certain extent only for cities of certain sizes, 1 million plus, maybe. This was particularly clear when we analyzed the finance options for secondary cities. It is a focus, particularly connecting to certain land value capture tools on finance and speed, which normally stand in certain contrast with problems. Problems, what we have seen is particular everything that doesn't fit so well into the city, like the informal urbanization, that often also sometimes property claims, etc. So this often gets singled out. This was particularly the case in India, where basically villages and informal urbanization were singled out. They were excluded from those plans and to be dealt later, and to date they haven't been dealt with to a certain extent. So my final slide, and the question is like how we could really operationalize land-based finance for climate change. If we consider like looking at the number of people living in cities, most people live in cities that are not that large. So considering administrative capacity, etc. So what of land-based finance mechanism would work in secondary cities? And how would they work where a quarter of the urban population works, so informal settlements, etc. Based on the understanding of what I found in my research, I would be very interested to discuss some of those points with the experts later on. And yeah, it might be a focus. The land-based finance literature is very much focused on like where governments take a strong role. Maybe there are other ways that we could have more bottom-up, focused on people just thinking at the scale of the problem, the scale of finance needed with climate change and resilience. So that's from my side, I think. And thank you very much. and I give the word to Eric.
That's perfect. You know, the Swiss are renowned for their timekeeping devices, and so I think we really did the right thing by asking you to go first. You set a wonderful example of perfect timekeeping, and also I think your choice of Gujarat for your case study is quite auspicious. Of course. Modi himself, Prime Minister Modi, was previously chief minister at Gujarat, and some of you may know Keshav Varma, who was at the World Bank, who was actually brought to the World Bank because of his role as municipal commissioner in Ahmedabad, the capital of Gujarat. And Keshav Varma has done, really path-breaking work in promoting urban development and capacity building through the World Bank, now returned to India. So I think that choice of case study, sort of gives extra legs to your case study, and thank you for sharing that with us. So I'll turn now, and there we go. I'll ask Dario Kozak if you would please join us. And I think now you know the drill, right? So I'll sign off and press my start button.
Yes, thank you very much. I'll share my screen. Okay, so first of all, thank you very much, Cynthia and the organizers, for this very stimulating invitation. I'm very pleased to be here joining this panel. I will present very briefly two projects which are connected between each other. The first one, it was really a seed project that was funded by the Lincoln Institute, and we completed a few years ago. And this project opened up a number of other initiatives, and I'm going to show at the end a sequel of that project, which is right now starting, also funded by the Lincoln Institute. In between those two projects, there was also the execution of a pilot project, which was done through a Horizon 2020 project called Connexus that was funded by the European Union. So this is going to be a bit my presentation. So I'll start by proposing a very straightforward statement, which later on we can nuance in the discussion. But the first message that I want to pass through this presentation is that all things being equal, investment in blue-green infrastructure produces a higher land value uplift than that of gray infrastructure. So I want this to be the main theme of this presentation. I will use as a witness case the case study that we use for this project that I mentioned just now, which was based on a stream basin in Buenos Aires, in the metropolitan area of Buenos Aires, which covers 4 different jurisdictions, which is typically the case in most hydric basin, and it's part of the complexity of working with hydric basin as opposed to administrative jurisdiction. But this is what a sustainable water management and nature-based solution demands, that we use, for example, ecosystem boundaries or water basins instead of rigid administrative boundaries. And we started this project very influenced and also wanted to have a say in a discussion after a very tragic flood that occurred in 2013 in Buenos Aires. And the epicenter of that flood was in the Medrano stream basin, where 3 people died. So we wanted to have an opinion in the discussion. Our project started we compared 3 scenarios, and the first scenario that we compared was the gray infrastructure scenario that was being proposed at the moment, with a very large alleviating tunnel. This was proposed in 2015, and for the moment it hasn't been built yet, but that's the official solution for this presentation. So as I said, we completed this research study, which was awarded with the Declaration of Environmental Interest by the city of Buenos Aires, and we published it. Here is an article, but also we presented it in several fora, and included publications in Spanish and English. So it's a larger study, which included also a hydraulic model. So we had a set of working hypotheses for the urban project and for the hydraulic model, but for the land value working hypothesis, we proposed this very straightforward, simple statement, which were also easy to test. The first one was that the works proposed in the Medrano stream basin generate a land value uplift, and consequently it is possible for the public sector to capture some of that value created. This is very consistent to all of what we have heard before. The second, that flood control is associated with an increase in the price of the affected properties and save it from avoided damage. So this is basically the material with which we would work. And the third one is that in the scenarios that include the blue-green infrastructure approach, the enhancement of urban environmental qualities produces an uplift in land value above of that generated by conventional flood control measures. And this fits the initial statement that I passed. So we compared 3 scenarios. The first one was the official proposal, which was a large-scale gray infrastructure that consisted in creating a new alleviating tunnel below the existent culvert, which is the historical culvert of the stream that was culverted in the 40s. So the new in-depth alleviating tunnel would enhance the flood control, taking it to a 10-year return period. The second scenario was the proposal of deculverting the existent historical culvert, and instead of building an alleviating tunnel, a large-scale alleviating tunnel, building a series of floodable parks, open-air reservoirs, combined with the extended capacity of the deculverted, the daylighted stream. The third scenario was a combination of the first 2 scenarios, taking it to another level, the flood protection, taking it from a 10-year return period to a 50-year return period. So we use 6 variables, combining land-based finance variables with also water quality variables and flood control variables. So the main message that fits to the initial statement is that the gray infrastructure solution only or the only mechanism that uplifts the land value is the increase in the flood control. The second scenario, on top of that mechanism, also has the public space enhancement, which is very important, and we can discuss later on that it has a more stable effect when affecting land value. And the third one has also the public space, the deculverting, the creation of a linear park, which was part of the proposal, and also a lesser degree of uplift, which was the the difference between a 10-year return period and a 50-year return period in terms of the flood protection. So without going into too much detail into this table, which is in the published results of the work, we can see that in the second scenario, all the variables measured better than in the gray infrastructure scenario. In the third scenario, which was the combination of both, all the measures also ranked better, except from the production cost, because obviously it's more expensive, the combination of these two. But that was an ex-ante large-scale proposal and large-scale study, which, as I said, opened up a number of different initiatives. One of those was the actual construction of a series of sustainable urban drainage system, rain gardens, within the Medrano stream basin in the municipality of San Martin, which was partially funded by the municipality and by the European Union through the Connexus Horizon 2020 project. So a rain garden is like a green stormwater device, which decreases the risk of flood, but most importantly, improves the quality of water that afterwards is discharged, in the case of Buenos Aires, into the Rio de la Plata, in general to rivers or the sea, and later on into the ocean. So those are the best two characteristics or the most important features of the rain gardens. So this is the place of the intervention before the construction. This is during the construction, which also was a pilot case of the Horizon 2020 project that we worked in. So we used it also. This is, for example, these are pictures of a conference that we had in Buenos Aires with the experts that came from the conference. And so this was part of both an initiative from the municipality, but also this academic side. These are the rain gardens that are constructed now. Later on, if we have time, I can tell you a little bit more about the context of the neighborhood and some characteristics of the place where it is. This is the rain gardens when they function on a rainy day, taking the water, taking pressure from the rainwater, from the stormwater system of the city. And this is some very initial analysis of the cost-benefit analysis, in which you can see that the internal rate of return ranks well. We consider the actual cost of construction and maintenance of the rain gardens and a number of benefits. But here, and this is something important to stress, one of the difficulties in doing cost-benefit analysis for NBS project, for blue-green infrastructure projects, is that there are a lot of indirect benefits that sometimes are very difficult to measure, even though we know that they exist, and even though now even more difficult than establishing the quantity sometimes to assign a monetary value to this. So, but this is just to have a first overview of the cost-benefit analysis and continue the discussion of the importance in investing in this type of projects in the city. So I think I did well with the timing, I hope.
Yes, I think Anthony must have lent
references.
you his Swiss watch. That was perfect. So there are a couple of things that I think stand out about your presentation, Daniel, that worth noting. One is it's very nice and tangible, right? So it kind of brings this down to the kinds of daily daily life experience that are important to people who dwell in these cities. So I think that's very useful. It's not pie in the sky. It's really sort of water in the boots, right? And I also like the fact that you have the 3 different scenarios, 6 different variables. So there's a nice kind of systematic way of working through the different options and sort of through that mechanism reinforcing that the value of this kind of approach really depends upon the context and how one engages with it. And lastly, I think the point that I would mention is that you talk about the stream and working within the basin, and I think that's a lesson that applies more broadly. I remember at a conference some years ago in Bangkok, Chris Zevenbergen, whom some of you might know at the Institute for Hydrological Studies in the Netherlands, was talking about how to deal with flooding on a massive scale there, and was pointing out that a lot of urban planners start with a land use plan and then after the fact think about how to manage the water. And his argument was that we actually need to do it in the reverse order. We need to think about how the water is, because the water is going to flow, the water is going to do its thing one way or the other. And so if we can manage that first and then develop our land uses around that, then that's the approach that he advocated. And I could see a kind of an echo of that in your presentation. So thank you very much for sharing that with us, Daniel. And if I might, so you are now excused for the time being. And I would like to call upon Lord Alex, if he would share with us some of his experience, including with 3 cities in China that we'd love to hear about. And you've got the precedent set by you, so I think I need to say no more. I'll sign out and turn on my timer.
Well, thank you, Eric. That's the first thing to say. The British aren't known for their watches, unlike the Swiss, but they'll nevertheless try and be punctual. Anyway, so I'll try and do my talk in a slightly different way to how I imagined I might have done it. I'll try and use these 2 invocations of Eric's to think about, why should we invest in land-based? Why should we use land-based finance to think about climate change? And conversely, what can land-based finance do to achieve some of those ends? So I guess the point of departure and the point of connection between this session and the previous one is this, the underlying principle for why we might consider land-based finance a suitable source of investment for any of these forms of adaptation to the broader environment of which land is a component, relates to these, the questions that were posed most famously by the classical economists, ultimately to whom should the uplift in land value resulting from consent to develop accrue. I think my point of departure from that, and what I'll try and narrate in this presentation, is that sometimes in the modern sense, policymakers, when they're confronted with so many different options, so many different hungry policy areas, resource-hungry policy areas, they have to make judgments, and they frequently use some economics to make judgments about where they will choose to invest and the kinds of things that they might use a source of investment like land-based finance, what they might use that to facilitate, or what they might actually use that to invest it in. So if I go back to people that many of you will have heard of, like Erwin van der Krabben and so forth, there's some really interesting work out there in the literature which describes this broader policy context, the mature policy context that we all confront in our individual nations about the competition for resources effectively. But in an era rather defined by really significant climate change, one of the things that is propelled to the top of that list is mitigation and adaptation to changes to the climate within which our cities and towns are located. So This slide simply just tries to relate some of those points about the broader literature to some of the things that I'll try and present empirically, which is really the kind of the conspicuous things that confront us all, the kinds of effects that climate change might have on land markets, on real estate markets, and then correspondingly the question about the degree to which we can use land-based finance to mitigate some of these the areas that I've used on the slide for indicative purposes only, how we can perhaps make them more adaptable or mitigate them from the effects of climate change. So just a handful from the recent past. So I'll start in the bottom left-hand corner. Eifel in Germany suffered really significant flooding. That's a before and after picture from 2021, and I'm minded to relate this to some of the things that Daniel has just been talking about in parts of Latin America. Clearly, the impact of significant changes to weather events is going to be an important thing that we might consider as an appropriate source of funding from land-based finance. And again, the argument being, I suppose, that this is mitigation. It's land as part of the broader environment. So there's a kind of logic to that, an internal logic, which speaks again to some of those classical economists' points about the regulation of land and land's regulation within the broader environment. Top left-hand corner, Malibu, California, all those places that many of us will have seen through Hollywood movies. On the left-hand side, all those movie stars with those nice oceanfront houses. And that's the area on fire on the right-hand side. Again, it's significant in this instance because this is obviously a really high-value real estate market, not just within California, not just within the United States, but globally. We can think of this has been a really significant area where you could levy really significant land value from real estate development in such a high-demand area. But if we look to the future, the viability of that may change if we start to incorporate vulnerability to climate change into that kind of calculus for how we might think about it. And then the bottom right-hand corner, the bit that I'm going to try and talk about it today, that's Beijing, kind of before and after type photograph, which indicates the most significant kind of public policy issue in China, which is in the vernacular, the local vernacular, haze. Or for us, I guess, air pollution, most commonly measured through the incidence of PM 2.5, or particulate matter of a particularly small character. So the questions are these. So, transition from thinking just about this as an economic question of how much can be raised to one which is now more interested in not just values, the value of what we can raise, but after that, return on investment. What could we invest in? What should we invest in? How is it captured? What is it spent upon? Those related questions of the instruments that are employed, and then correspondingly the investment that those instruments are used to facilitate. Now, the previous session talks quite a lot about instruments in one way and another. So I'm going to try and limit myself to talking not about land value capture's various approaches and how they fit with different governance systems and so forth, but rather to take a cue from Eric's challenge to talk more about the case for thinking of land-based finance as a suitable form of investment for mitigation of climate change. So the first question that we really need to answer in that are the descriptive ones about how much is raised and what is it spent on. How much do we currently spend on mitigating current development in the face of climate change? Now, that's quite a difficult question to answer, and it really does depend upon record keeping and the availability of data. Now, we might not be so good at watches, but one of the things that we are slightly better at in the UK is keeping records for this. So the table that you can see on the slide indicates the aggregate value. If you take the bottom right-hand corner, this £6.9 billion, that's sterling pounds GBP, of value was captured. We use a negotiated system for the most part in the financial year 2018-19. So almost £7 billion of economic value was captured. But because it's negotiated, what it gets spent upon is determined by the character of those negotiations. So if climate change is at the forefront of the planner, the negotiator's mind, then you would imagine we would start to see things like open space in the environment, the fifth line down, would have a significant proportion of the 7 billion of it would be spent on in those types of area. But you can see in actuality, we spend a tiny fraction, only 157 million out of that 7 billion total on open space in the environment. We're spending hardly any of the money that's raised through the system of land-based finance in this small country is being used to fund adaptation to climate change. Instead, we're spending the majority of it on affordable housing. 4.6 billion out of that 7 billion total is going into affordable housing. And this speaks to broader socioeconomic, sociocultural happenings in other comparator countries. Other European countries, other Western countries have similar issues with undersupply of housing, significant house price inflation, and a corresponding desire to meet that through affordable housing. So the short answer to the question, what are we doing in the UK to try and meet the challenges that are affecting Malibu in California and Eiffel in Germany? And us too, we have significant changes in weather events. Typically flooding is the most significant in the UK. The answer to that question is hardly anything at all. We're doing a lot more to try and address a broader social issue relating to the under-availability, the undersupply of affordable housing. Now that leads us to then perhaps start to ask questions about, well, what if it were different? How could we marshal an argument to try and present to policymakers that it might be sensible to invest in a broader range of assets in public goods effectively? So in the time that remains available to me, I'll try and just run you through very quickly a piece of research which was funded through the Lincoln Institute's China Fellowship, which I was fortunate enough with two colleagues to win back in 2022, where we looked at this specific issue of air quality in China to ask the question, what would be the stimulus effect to land values of improving air? So in this instance, it's very much that thinking that I tried to introduce at the beginning of thinking of land as part of the broader environment of which it's clearly an element. If we improve the environment within which the real estate markets that are dependent, literally dependent upon land exist, what does that do to the value of that land? So I'm minded now to try and keep equations out of talks like this because they're not really appropriate. So I've kept the maths out of it, but instead what I'll try and do is present very quickly an account of the 3 Chinese cities that we looked at in depth through that fellowship. So they were Suzhou, Beijing, and Zhengzhou, which is the kind of central city. So this map just simply indicates the spatial incidence of that measure of air quality, PM2.5, and its concentration. You can see that it's significantly variable. Some parts of urban China, these are huge cities, I should say, it goes without saying to some extent these days, but huge geographical metropolitan areas which have variable effects of air quality. So we designed a model to try and to strip out an understanding of the relationship between the incidence of this variable PM2.5 and the corresponding effect on air quality, and then to tease out from that some elasticities to try and work out if there is a 5-10% improvement in air quality, i.e. PM2.5 is reduced by that amount, what does that do to the value of land? So invoking the previous ceteris paribus, all other things being equal, assumption and so forth. This slide just indicates that if we take, for example, the city of Suzhou in Jiangsu province, it's almost a one-to-one relationship. 9.5% improvement in air quality. 10% improvement in air quality results in a 9.5% uplift in land values. And then just taking that one step further on, we can start to then perhaps make some monetary associations between that. So if we look, for example, at a city like Zhengzhou, what we can say is that this is a part of the, sorry, I've got an alarm on. If we look at a city like Zhengzhou, for example, what we can say is that there's a five-year plan, as there is for most Chinese cities, and that the amount of land release programmed in for that 5-year program if that could be accompanied by a relatively modest 3% improvement in air quality, it would result in a very significant stimulus, 34.2 billion RMB over the course of the whole plan period through to 2035. Very significant uplift in land values. So more value to be harnessed as a result of improving air quality, to put it simply. And I think that's probably where I should end, because I can see that Eric has rejoined us. But I'll finish very quickly, if I may, by just saying this, that this simply demonstrates that there can be a positive relationship, positive stimulus between land values. Improving air quality can result in an improvement in land values, and a corresponding case for policymakers to think about that as a way of harnessing greater land value in the future, and a stimulus, a positive, virtuous cycle, if you like. This is restricted to China and to only 3 Chinese cities, so it's a relatively modest piece of funding, a relatively modest piece of research, but there's clearly a case there to think about this in a broader sense in Latin America, in other Western European and North American contexts, for example. And so, like all good academics, I'll finish with a case for further research and hand back to you, Eric.
Thank you so much, Alex. This is actually, well, first of all, we're on a roll. So this is a wonderful contribution and a wonderful extension of the conversation that Anthony and Daniel have already embarked on. And it's very apropos, in my view, that the case studies that you did in China were funded by the Lincoln Institute because in the case of China, as I'm sure you're aware, and many members of our audience are already aware, China is quite unusual in that its municipal finances are very heavily dependent upon land value. And part of this dates back to even the 1990s, when there was a very deep restructuring of the public financing system nationwide. And essentially most of the revenues were going to the central government, but the municipal governments still had their burden of expenditures. And to fill that fiscal gap, they began to rely on land values, primarily at the beginning, as I'm sure your study shows, or recounts. At the beginning, the municipal governments were primarily basing it on actually selling land. They were looking to acquire land from rural uses, compensate rural collectives on the basis of the value of that land in rural use, converting it to urban use, improving the value of that land for urban use through infrastructure investments, and paying for those infrastructure investments through the sale of that land, then through primary markets that the municipalities have a monopoly over. More recently, as I'm sure you've recounted in this, is the movement towards actually tapping into that value for loans and moving through the banking system, including the shadow banking system. And again, underlying the Lincoln Institute link to this, Liu Zhe, who was probably very actively supporting your role, I would imagine, who in his capacity as director of the Lincoln Center that's at Peking University. He wrote a wonderful piece published in 2019 that I find one of the clearest pieces one can find, just laying out how that municipal financing system works and what would be the prospects for introducing a property tax in the Chinese context. And so I think that, together with the case study that you're looking at and linking it to the climate change issues that we're talking about here, provides a very rich sort of information nexus that can be considered in the Chinese case, which is somewhat unique, but that means it expands our sense of what the range of institutional possibilities are. So thank you so much for getting us started on that, Alex.
Thank you, Eric.
So I turn now to my good friend and colleague, Cynthia Goytia, who has maybe had time to rest her voice a little bit, and who now has the challenge of taking the very extensive information. I've already had a chance to look through her slides, and there's a lot of information there. And so this will be a wonderful test of her amazing capabilities to see how she can get so much information into so little time. So Cynthia, when you're ready.
Wait a minute.
Okay, I won't start it yet.
I cannot turn on my screen. Let me see. What's happening? Wait a minute.
We can hear you.
Yes, I know.
And we can see a blank screen. And we can see a lovely visual image on another screen.
Let me do it again.
Okay.
Oh, here am I.
There you are. Yes.
Share my screen.
Very good.
Are you able? Now I start this way. Are you able to see my presentation?
Yes.
Okay.
We're able to see you and the presentation.
So I will continue some of the issues that have been raised in the other presentations, and I will briefly explore the growing threats posed by climate change and the urgent need for adaptation and mitigation finance, and the potential for land-based finance instruments. But also, I want to take one particular issue, that is the issue of land markets. And I think that what we think is, well, land-based finance will have effect on land values, and this will be, and so local governments can be able to reap part of this increase in value that is generated by this type of climate actions. But when market participants do not adequately discount future risks, there may be a reduced willingness to invest in necessary adaptation measures. So this lack of foresight can result in underpreparedness for future climate-related events and leading to more severe economic or social impacts. So I will take that issues and basically how land and housing markets are pricing those risks. So I want to bridge these existing knowledge gaps in land markets and land-based finance overall. So I have a few slides that talking about, well, what is happening with climate change all over the world, and the signs of climate change is looking more worrying each year. And what is more important is that what for example, Nicholas Stern says that levels of living in the future are endogenous, so they depend on choices made today. And I think this is the most important thing for this presentation with all the EPCC and everything. The other thing is, and we talk these days, is the importance of subnational climate action, no? And because part of the emissions the global emissions, 40% are from cities, and cities control land use regulation, building codes, transportation, urban form, and so they are very well enabled to work on mitigation strategies, not only in established cities, but also in rapidly urbanizing areas. When we talk about Africa, we are talking about cities that are growing very, very fast, and we need to take all these issues in consideration, because inappropriate decisions will lock in emissions for decades, and all the risk that climate change is having in all those areas. And also adaptation strategies, not only land use decisions and investments, but also these investments in soft adaptation strategies like this type of green infrastructure that shows Daniel, but also another more costly infrastructures like seawalls and whatever it is. So adaptation is an urgent problem requiring significant investment, and because we have a lot of people exposed to flood. I'm not going to the data of all those things. Sea level rise it's another very, very important issue and expected to increase properties at flood of risk by 11% and boost average annual losses by at least 25% by 2050 in US. So I think this is a global phenomenon that we need to tackle at scale, and also the issue of rapid urbanization, amplifying risk, and we know some very, very surprising the figures about that. Urban area in 100-year floodplain doubled since 1985, potentially exacerbating future crises. And urban expansion is fastest, for example, in Asia, and especially in China and India, were the places that you were talking about. So global investment needs, as UNIP in 2022 explained, at least 4 trillion per year annually, globally. Emerging markets and developing economies need 2.4 trillion per annum, and need to scale investments in these two areas, decarbonization or mitigation and adaptation. And we know that we have a huge housing funding gap. We are investing only a very small share of what we need, and massive untapped resources by land. That we talk today about all of that. I'm not going in how each of these instruments can help to address climate change, particularly adaptation to flood, as we understand, for example, and that is the thing that I'm going to focus more. Flood, stormwater, and sea level rise are more evident in land. So that is the key of the issue, and that is central to understanding on how land markets behave when we have this type of risk in different cities. So I have 2 slides where I explain how each of these instruments can be used for addressing adaptation investments. I'm not going on them, betterment contributions, flood adjustment, impact fees, charges of building rights, and all those things. But the crucial role is understanding land market dynamics, no? And land markets respond differently to climate risk, with price discounts ranging, for example, from none to 30%. But surprisingly, some high-risk properties are overpriced. With coastal properties, recently someone talked about California, and I thought, well, Miami and all the coastal properties in many cities are appreciating even faster despite all these growing risks. So in Miami, for example, home less than 1 foot above sea level command a premium of 18%. Overpriced is given overpriced. We can find overpriced properties also in Lagos, in Nigeria, and many other markets from developing countries that have higher, that are not pricing their level of risk. This mispricing creates systemic risks for municipalities, especially those that are heavily reliant on property taxes, or credit institutions exposed to mortgage risk. For example, there is a very interesting analysis from the IFM, the International Monetary Fund, and from the national, the Central Bank of Denmark, stating how are mortgaged in Copenhagen. In fact, Copenhagen is one of the most important cities that are investing in adaptation for many years and have very transparent markets, and so risk is already priced in land markets. But all these institutions, particularly because 7 of the 10 banks that work there are located and very exposed in that market, well, they are exposed to mortgage risk. So understanding these land market dynamics is crucial for designing effective land-based finance instruments to fund adaptation and build resilience. And that is perhaps the main message that I have. So one issue is that amenity value outweighs risk perceptions, no? Especially for high-income buyers. Understanding this market dynamic is crucial, no? And one of the most striking findings is the persistent influence of coastal amenity values on property prices, even in the face of growing risk. The inconsistent quality and accessibility of risk information, and this is a very central topic, and the variable stringency of disclosure requirements across jurisdiction emerge as one key factor. So strengthening risk information systems and disclosure frameworks thus needs to be a top policy priority. The role of insurance is another very important topic when we have, for example, subsidies, which are in some way shaping risk perceptions and prices. So there is a huge space for reforming insurance markets to better align premiums with risk while ensuring affordability and access. And this is a complex but necessary challenge. And crucially, adaptive capacity is not evenly distributed, with stark socioeconomic inequalities producing a landscape of resilience inequalities. And we can see that in Miami, and we can see that in Lagos, for example. No, this topic of resilience inequalities. So policymakers must confront this equity challenge head-on, ensuring that investments in resilience benefit the most vulnerable and that the costs of adaptation are progressively distributed. Finally, these financing mechanisms should ensure that the distribution of financial obligations correlates with the distribution of benefits, something very, very difficult to conceptualize. And we have two roles for doing that. One is general taxation, spreading the financial burden across a broader tax base, including residents outside the immediate catchment area, but who still benefit from the city's overall resilience. And I'm going to take some of this for the case of Buenos Aires. And the other thing is fees and contributions and all these other land-based financial features, which are more directly targeted to beneficiaries. So let me tell about Buenos Aires. Daniel has presented a lot about Buenos Aires. Buenos Aires had a project, adaptation project financed by the World Bank. What we know from the analysis of this case study is that even under conservative assumptions, the increase in land value could match or even surpass the investment costs. And what we have here is, in the case of Buenos Aires, is that it demonstrates that the transformative potential of targeted flood protection investment. These were gray infrastructure, not what Daniel was talking, but it safeguards and increased property values that were facing a value discount from 4.3 to 11%, but also unlock, and this is quite the thing that I think it's quite very important, a cascade of positive externalities. So we can increase FAR in these areas because before they can be flooding very usually, but now you can increase FAR, and this increase in FAR, for example, can increase density and avoid that the city continue extending. So what I think is that it can accommodate more residents, and what I think is that there is a very important issue that we need to consider: the general equilibrium effects of flood flood protection investment, which are not only influenced but localized land values resulting from the reduced risk, but also have far-reaching implications on urban development patterns, more densification, less extension, and supply in housing markets. You can increase the supply of housing and other avoided cost, right? Disruptions in accessibility, in transportation, in productivity. So I think that the benefits of these adaptation investments are much more wider than we are thinking when we talk about only land values. So, and I can say more things about Buenos Aires, but I want to talk about Analia. Copenhagen is, in fact, they have a lot of local level maps and information that support effective capitalization of risk. House exposed to 100-year flood risk are sold at a 6% discount. Other houses projected to be exposed to flooding in 2050 onwards due to sea level are trading at a 3 or 4% discount. But flood risk is highly concentrated in specific coastal rock locations. So financial institutions are becoming increasingly aware of the risk posed by extreme weather events and rising sea levels. So Copenhagen has a very interesting climate adaptation plan, which combines gray and green infrastructure investment for private adaptation measures. This Cloudboard's, I don't know if I pronounce it well, management plan, with an estimated investment of 1.3 billion is financed through water tariff for hydraulic components. So the main firm households are paying for the main water company water tariffs and fees, but also municipal investments in urban space improvements, green infrastructure, expected to generate 188 million increase in surrounding property values, which can then are captured, in this case, by the property tax system.
So Cynthia, especially because we're such good friends, I can't be seen to be giving you more time, even though I want to hear you continue. But I think it's very important that we keep the same framework for each of the four speakers.
Okay,
However,
1 minute, it's okay?
1 minute.
Okay, so Lagos is the opposite thing. So you have flooding challenges, and you need to enhance risk information and awareness and maps and tools, integrate climate risk into valuation and taxation. There is a lot of things to do, something like Enrique was talking today. So the enabling land-based finance for adaptation has to look to improving risk pricing through information disclosure and awareness, and also about insurance too, developing robust land data infrastructure and valuation systems, enabling the supporting legal frameworks for land-based financing implementation, which can be at the national level or at the subnational level, engaging stakeholders to navigate all these political barriers, and mobilizing technical capacity and assistance and things that we have talked before in the other panel. So that's it. I finish.
Good. So I want to thank, and first of all, invite all of the previous speakers as well to rejoin us. I want to thank all of the speakers for doing a really commendable job of taking a lot of information and compressing that into such a short time. But one of the benefits we get from that is that we still have 12.5 minutes for some public discussion. I do want to let the participants know you can send a message through the chat. You can either send it to everyone or you can send it to me directly. We don't have a whole lot of time. If I do see some messages, what I may do is allow a few of them to collect, because there may be some themes that emerge. But meanwhile, I think we've got a lot that we can discuss right here. Are we missing Anthony? So I'll invite Anthony to rejoin us as well. There we go. I guess he was so focused on not seeing my face that he felt that we should reciprocate somehow. So I actually do. One of the reasons, as I said, that I was keen to have Cynthia present last is sort of give the presentation just prior to the discussion, is that in addition to the case studies on Buenos Aires and Copenhagen and Lagos and Miami that she referred to, I think for me, what was most valuable about her presentation is that she's kind of teaching us how to think about the issue. And ultimately, that's really where we get our mileage, right? I mean, many of us, look at case studies, and the case studies are informative and intriguing, etc. But a real challenge for all of us is, how do we take a fascinating case study that we've looked at from one context and think about how to carry it forward into our own context or into a third context. And when I listened to Cynthia's presentation and when I looked at her slides prior to the presentation, it really struck me that she's done us a huge service. First of all, and she's already made these points, so I'm just reiterating what she's already said, but I really do feel that what she's saying is very important. First of all, her flagging the land market dynamics, right, which really is kind of also, one might even generalize that, and she did mention this as well, just kind of talking about the endogeneity, right, that how all of this is going to unfold depends on what we do, depends on the interaction between climate and land use and how cities evolve and the values that are there and the role of land markets in that. And around the world, there are all these different kinds of institutions. We were talking about how the distinct aspects of China or how things may be different in Lagos or how they might be different in Miami, etc. But markets, one way or the other, are going to find their way into the game. And so they can work for us or against us. And Cynthia's really giving us guidance. I see that she's giving us guidance in two ways. One is she's talking about this context in which the land dynamics flow. So she talked about flood risk pricing, right? The fact that there are risks associated with climate change, and that feeds its way one way or the other into land values. That also feeds its way through positive externalities, negative externalities, land value changes, land value increases, land value decreases, population dynamics that are responding to all of these, built environment dynamics that she's pointed to, and the general equilibrium effect. So she's, I think, done us a real valuable service by reminding us that that's kind of the modeling context, that if we want to really look at where interventions might bring us, we have to do it within that kind of modeling context. Secondly, she's pointed to, in her last slide, which I was really hoping she'd get to, and I was really conflicted about having to cut her off time-wise, because I really wanted to get to the last slide, which was very, very important, and she did get there, which is looking at the tools we have. So that, again, thinking about that same general equilibrium context, thinking about the role of markets, she's talking about risk pricing and how we can make risk pricing front and center to that linkage between land value and climate change. And she talks about the need for data infrastructure, legal frameworks, stakeholders, and capacity building. And she did all of that in a little bit more than 8 minutes. But that's because I'm a softie. But I think that was wonderful. And so I would invite our other presenters to maybe think about if they'd like, I mean, say whatever you'd like, but one suggestion I have is that you might comment about how you might view your own presentation in the context of this kind of framework that Cynthia has set out for us. And then I'll ask Cynthia to then respond.
Let me add something that perhaps can help, because
Yes.
I talk about how risk is priced in land markets, and we saw that there are a lot of cities we have overpriced land markets. The main important thing is that land value capture can be used not only to increase value, but to maintain value. For example, all the properties in Miami, in the coast, the exposed, need to maintain their value, and the city needs to maintain their fiscal base because that's their source of finance. So I think that we can broaden the conceptualization of land-based finance, not only to increase land values and capture part of this value, but also as a tool to maintain value in a lot of overpriced markets. That's it.
Very nice. Thank you. Very helpful. Alex, Anthony, Daniel, anything you'd like to add?
No, I was thinking of a point raised by Cynthia about the far-reaching consequences of investing in flood protection, which exceed the land value uplift. For example, the possibility of densifying an area which was before didn't meet the FAR because it was perceived as floodable. But this is something that we discussed a lot with a hydraulic engineer that was part of our team, and it's a contentious issue because from a risk analysis point of view, you have risk as a combination of hazard, exposure, and vulnerability. And if you increase density, you are increasing the exposure. And also in the context of climate change, when we don't know exactly how much the hazard will increase in the future, there's this tension between having sometimes to increase the FAR and densify, because otherwise it would be impossible to create any change that would support and would well build up the infrastructure necessary to to increase the flood protection. But then there is a limit of the density that you can increase, because otherwise you are, for example, the point made by Martin in the chat, bringing the case of the recent floods in the south of Brazil. This extreme, sometimes completely unexpected tragedies. This is something to bear in mind, that we are dealing with scenarios that we don't know exactly how extreme are going to be in the near future. So the question of densifying can be sometimes, difficult.
Eric, if I may just add a footnote,
yes, Alex.
What Daniel has just said. So yeah, I think Cynthia's points about risk are very well made, and the framework that I wonder, so it makes me wonder about what I might do next in research terms and how I might use some of those ideas going forward. And I think willingness to pay is a common way for economists to think about risk. So because so much of land value capture or land-based finance is related to cost sharing, so developer may sometimes pass some of the costs of the anticipated costs of land-based finance back onto a landowner, for example, that type of thing, or pass them forward to an end consumer in the form of enhanced or inflated real estate prices. You have these questions about how these things are valorized, and so the point that Martin makes in the chat makes it, those are obviously very difficult things to valorize. There's a long history of economics trying to value some of these threats to human life and so forth, and valuing lives differently, or implicitly valuing lives differently as a result of past spending patterns and things like that. So these are all really interesting points, and trying to understand how the calculus of risk relates to the actions of policymakers becomes quite an interesting thing. So yeah, thanks, Cynthia. I think they're really relevant and valid points.
Thank you both of you. And I'd like to both Daniel and Alex have referred to a very thought-provoking comment that Martin Smolka sent us, one of my heroes in this area of research. And he was, as you pointed out, looking at the recent flooding, the devastating flooding there, and sort of challenging us to think about how the kinds of approaches that we're advocating might have made a difference, right, in a kind of context like that. And I think it's a very good challenge for him to put forward. We've got 1 minute left, and we're back to our Swiss timekeeper, Anthony.
Yeah, thank you very much. No, I was also just thinking out loud. I mean, to a certain extent, the risk pricing is happening naturally, particularly on the low end, because what we have and what we have seen in every kind of catastrophe that is unfolding more recently, the most affected are informal settlement slum dwellers, because they often reside in extremely exposed land, etc. So when we talk really from a global perspective, we have to find a mechanism how we can actually address it, because what you also see, it is not only they are the most exposed, but through the occupation also of sensitive areas, they aggravate certain situations, certain floods, etc. So if you really want to have efficient planning responses, etc., we will have to really find effective ways to incorporate these settlements also in benefiting from land-based finance. So I don't have an answer on that, but this will be one of the challenges.
Well, one way to judge a panel like this is at its conclusion, are people still wanting more? And I myself certainly am, but we've come in on time and on budget. And I know that it's lunchtime in Buenos Aires. It's noon there. There will be a 1.5 hour break now till 1:30 Buenos Aires time, which is 4:30 GMT. And so I bid you all an enjoyable lunch, an enjoyable break. Thank you all for your participation, to the organizers for putting this together. And I'm going to direct my students to this this fall when I teach a class on related topics.
Thank you, Eric. Thank you all. I enjoyed very much the panel, and we will be back in a few hours. So let's join us in, I think it's 2 hours from now.
Thank you, Eric. Thanks, everyone.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.